It was just after dawn in Pine Hollow, a sleepy Oregon town nestled between thick woods and fog-covered hills. Captain Dennis Hale, a seasoned firefighter with salt and pepper hair and a heart that had seen too much, was sipping burnt coffee in the silence of the firehouse. Rain clung to the windows like a warning, and the air smelled of wet concrete and ash. Just as he was about to head inside for paperwork, a strange sound cut through the stillness. Soft, quick footsteps on the pavement, too light to be human. He turned and froze. Standing motionless at the edge of the station's driveway was a large German shepherd. His fur was soaked and matted, ears high and alert, eyes locked on Dennis with an intensity that felt human. But what struck Dennis most wasn't the dog's posture. It was what he held in his mouth. A dirty, blood-stained sneaker, white with faded red stripes and worn soles. The kind a teenager might wear. The kind that shouldn't be here. Dennis slowly approached. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, his voice low and uncertain. The dog didn't growl or run. He stood firm, eyes unwavering, as if demanding to be understood. There was blood, old, dark, crusted around the edges of the shoe. A name tag, barely visible inside the tongue. Katie. That one word hit Dennis like a punch to the chest. He'd heard no dispatches, no calls, no missing persons reports. And yet here was this animal, standing in front of him with a shoe that screamed for help. Without wasting a second, Dennis ran inside. "Josh!" he shouted. His younger partner, fresh into his third year at the department, looked up from the equipment bench. "Grab your gear. We've got something." Minutes later, they were outside, prepared to follow. But the dog, Axel, as they would come to call him, refused to enter the truck. Instead, he turned, took 3 steps toward the edge of the woods, and stopped, looking back once. That was all the invitation they needed. They followed him deep into the forest, through damp earth and creeping branches. The path wasn't familiar. It wound like something carved by instinct. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became, as if the trees were holding their breath. Dennis's gut tightened with every step. Something was off. Not just wrong off. The kind of wrong that lives in the pit of your stomach. Finally, Axel stopped in front of a collapsed-looking wooden cabin, half swallowed by moss and rot. Its door hung open, creaking slightly with each gust of wind. Outside the door, a second sneaker. Perfect match. More blood. Dennis exchanged a look with Josh. No words. Just breath. Just fear. Inside, the air was thick. Mildew, rusted metal, and something worse. The kind of smell that doesn't belong anywhere near the living. They stepped in. Lanterns up. Hearts pounding. What they found in the shadows changed everything. The inside of the cabin felt like a grave. Dust floated like ghosts in the beams of their flashlights, and every step creaked with the kind of warning you don't ignore unless you're desperate. Dennis swept the beam across the broken furniture, mold-eaten walls, and newspaper clippings nailed in crooked rows. But it was Josh who spotted the trail first. Faint, smeared bloodstains leading toward a half-open door at the far end of the room. Beyond it, a narrow staircase descended into blackness. Axel stood beside the entrance, tail low, ears back. He didn't bark, he didn't need to. Dennis led the way down, his gloved hand brushing against the damp wall as they descended. The smell worsened with each step. Old rot, wet wood, and the unmistakable bite of dried blood. His flashlight flickered once, then steadied, landing on a shape in the far corner. A figure, curled in on itself, hidden under what looked like an old sleeping bag. For a moment, everything in the room stood still. The dust, the air, even time itself. Then the figure moved, just barely. A tremble, a breath. Josh rushed forward. It was a girl, thin, pale, no more than 15. Her hair clung to her face in wet clumps, and her lips were cracked and bloodied. She recoiled as Josh knelt beside her, shielding her eyes from the light. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You're safe now." But Dennis knew better. She wasn't safe. Not yet. She wasn't even speaking. Her eyes darted between them and the staircase, as if afraid someone, or something, might still be coming down after her. When Josh gently asked her name, she mouthed it more than said it. Katie. Dennis's blood turned cold. The name in the sneaker. This was her. But how had no one reported her missing? Who brought her here? And why? His instincts screamed that this was more than a rescue. It was the start of something bigger. He radioed for an ambulance, but the signal crackled. Dead. No reception out here. They were on their own. He glanced at Axel, now sitting beside Katie like a silent guardian, eyes trained on the stairs as if daring the darkness to move. Josh pulled a blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "We need to get her out of here," he said, voice low. "Now." But as Dennis turned toward the stairs, he noticed something. A loose floorboard near where Katie had been lying. Scratched, splintered, as if someone had tried to claw their way into it or worse, out. He knelt, pried it up with his flashlight handle. Beneath it, a small compartment. Inside, photos. Dozens of them. Polaroids. All of young girls. Not just Katie. And most of them were labeled. Dennis stared down at the box of Polaroids, his stomach tightening with every new image he flipped through. The girls looked young. Some no older than 9 or 10. Different hair colors, skin tones, expressions. Some were smiling, unaware. Others looked terrified. And at the bottom of each photo, written in faded ink or scratched in pen, was a name. Katie's was among them. It had been taken from the side, her eyes distant, her shirt torn at the collar. The timestamp in the corner, 3 days ago. Josh leaned over his shoulder, his face paling as he registered what they were looking at. "What the hell is this, man?" he whispered. Dennis didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was this the work of one person? A ring? A collector? There were too many photos, too organized, too deliberate. This wasn't random. And Katie had been down here in that basement with that box beneath her. Had she known? Or worse, had she been forced to look? He carefully placed the photos back, slid the compartment shut, and looked over at the girl. She was sitting up now, blanket tight around her, Axel pressed against her side. Her eyes were still wide, but less panicked, as if his presence brought her a fragile sliver of safety. Dennis knelt down in front of her. "Katie," he said softly, "can you tell us how you got here? Was someone else with you?" She looked at him, lips trembling, then slowly shook her head. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "He said if I screamed, no one would come." Josh's jaw clenched, his fists curling at his sides. "He?" Dennis asked gently. "Do you know his name?" Katie hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the stairs again. Then she whispered, "He called himself Uncle Ray. But he's not my uncle." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she turned into Axel's fur, hiding her face. Dennis stood, his pulse thudding in his ears. The name meant nothing to him, but the way she said it, there was history in it. Pain and familiarity. They had to move, fast. Whoever this Uncle Ray was, there was no guarantee he wouldn't come back. Dennis signaled to Josh, who helped Katie to her feet, steadying her. Axel stayed close, as if reading the tension in the room. As they reached the top of the stairs, Dennis checked his radio again. Still nothing. But just as he stepped outside the cabin to find signal, he heard it. A distant crack in the forest, like a branch snapping underfoot. They weren't alone anymore. Dennis raised a clenched fist, signaling Josh to stop. The crack of the branch hadn't been an animal. He knew the difference. It was deliberate, heavy, human. He scanned the treeline, his flashlight sweeping across thick underbrush and twisted trunks, but found only shadows that shifted with the mist. Behind him, Katie clung to Axel, her fingers buried in his fur, while Josh kept a protective arm around her shoulder. For the first time that morning, the forest felt alive. Not with nature, but with something watching. "We're not safe here," Dennis muttered. "We move fast, no stops." Josh nodded, eyes wide, jaw tight. They started down the path, retracing their steps through the forest, but the feeling of being followed stuck to their skin like sweat. Every crackle of leaves behind them made Dennis grip his flashlight tighter. He couldn't shake the thought that whoever Uncle Ray was, he knew that cabin. And if he knew the cabin, he might know who just took Katie away from it. 10 minutes in, the woods grew darker. The fog thickened, clinging to their legs, swallowing their footsteps. Then came the second sound, closer this time. A rustle. Then another. Dennis spun around, light flashing between trees. Nothing. "We're being tracked," he whispered. "He's not running. He's pacing us." Axel suddenly growled low, the sound deep and steady like a warning drum. Katie buried her face in his neck. Josh tightened his grip on the small rescue knife in his boot, his breathing sharp. Dennis made a choice. "We take the ridge off trail. Harder to follow," he said. He pushed through a gap in the brush, leading them up a narrow incline where the footing was uncertain and steep. Mud slipped beneath their boots. Branches clawed at their arms. But it was the only way to break the line of pursuit. At the top of the ridge, they found brief cover behind a cluster of pine trees. It was there, in the quiet, that Katie finally spoke again. "He told me there were others." Her voice trembled. "Girls before me said they never left." She looked up at Dennis, her face pale and drawn. "Do you think they're still down there?" Dennis didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to lie, but the truth felt too heavy to say. "We're gonna find out," he said at last. "But first, we get you out." Then, just as Josh turned to check the trail behind them, a voice cut through the stillness. Calm, slow, male. "You shouldn't have taken her." The voice came from somewhere just below the ridge, steady and too calm for the storm it carried. Dennis turned instantly, flashlight up, eyes scanning the slope. Nothing, just trees, shadows, silence. But the voice echoed again, closer this time. "She's mine. You don't understand what you've done." Katie froze, Axel growling at her side, his body stiff, ready. Dennis put himself between her and the edge of the hill, adrenaline pounding in his ears. Whoever Uncle Ray was, he wasn't running. He was hunting. And now he was speaking directly to them. Josh crouched beside a rock, scanning with his flashlight and clutching his knife, whispering, "We need to move. We're too exposed." But Dennis shook his head. "If we run, he'll follow. If we make a mistake, she dies." The weight of those words settled over all of them like a winter frost. Katie's breathing had gone shallow, her lips barely moving as she muttered, "He never lets go. He said once he chooses someone, they don't leave." That was when they saw him. A figure emerged from the mist at the bottom of the slope, tall, thin, with a heavy coat and a worn baseball cap pulled low. His face was barely visible, but even from a distance, Dennis could feel the presence. Cold, calculated, right? He didn't raise a weapon, didn't shout. He just stood there, arms at his sides, staring up. Then, slowly, he began to climb the hill, step by steady step, like a man with all the time in the world. Axel barked, loud and sharp, breaking the paralysis that had gripped them. Dennis raised his voice. "One more step and I drop you right here." His hand moved to his sidearm, standard issue, but rarely used. Ray didn't stop. Instead, he called back, his voice still calm, but now layered with something darker. "You think you're rescuing her? You have no idea what she's capable of." That made Josh glance at Katie, confused. But Dennis kept his focus on Ray. "You're not taking her. Not now. Not ever." Ray stopped, finally, just a few yards from the base of the ridge. And then, something changed. His posture shifted. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "You should check her wrist." Dennis blinked, stunned. "What? Her wrist?" Ray repeated. "Before it's too late." Dennis turned, hesitant. Katie looked terrified, confused, but she didn't resist when he gently took her hand. He pushed up the sleeve of her sweater and froze. There, carved into her skin, old but deep, was a symbol. A mark he recognized from one of the other photos. Dennis stared at the symbol carved into Katie's wrist, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't just a random mark. It was deliberate, precise. A circle intersected by a jagged line, almost like a compass shattered down the middle. His mind reeled, pulling from half-buried memories of old case briefings, missing children reports, patterns no one could quite connect. But now, here it was, carved into her skin. The same symbol had appeared on the bottom corners of some of the Polaroids in the cabin. Dennis hadn't noticed it at first, but now he couldn't unsee it. Josh stepped closer, his voice tense. "What the hell is that? Some kind of cult thing?" Dennis didn't answer right away. His instincts were screaming. This wasn't just the work of one deranged man. This had structure, ritual, pattern. Katie was still shivering, eyes fixed on the ground. When Dennis gently asked her, "Do you remember when this was done to you?" She blinked, then nodded slowly. "First night," she whispered. "He said it meant I was part of the family now." Down below, Ray was still watching, motionless, waiting, not scared, almost smug. Dennis turned back to the slope, yelling down with every ounce of command in his voice. "You branded a child. You think that makes you family?" But Ray just smiled, a thin, unsettling expression, and called back, "She came to me broken. I gave her purpose. You think you're saving her, but you don't know what she did before she got here." The words hit like a hammer. Katie's head dropped. Tears welled in her eyes, but she said nothing. Josh took a step back, visibly shaken. "Dennis, we need to go. We need to get her somewhere safe now." Dennis agreed, but he knew what Josh was really thinking. What if Ray wasn't lying? What if Katie had done something terrible before this? And worse, what if she'd been chosen because of it? Still, none of that mattered now. She was a victim, a survivor. Whatever came after would be dealt with later. Dennis looked back to Katie. "We're getting out of here. You're not going back to him. Ever." She nodded, barely. Her face was pale, but her grip on Axel's fur tightened, like she was holding on to life itself. Then, just as they began to move, a shot rang out. The sound cracked through the woods like thunder. Dennis dropped, shielding Katie. Josh hit the dirt. Axel barked violently, hackles raised. From the forest behind them, another figure emerged, and Ray was smiling. The second man stepped out of the shadows with the same eerie calm as Ray, but there was something colder about him, something practiced. He was tall, dressed in dark, heavy clothing, and wore black gloves despite the mild air. A rifle hung low in his hands, the barrel still faintly smoking. Dennis didn't recognize him, but Ray's expression said everything. This man wasn't just backup. He was part of whatever Ray was part of, maybe even higher up. Dennis stayed crouched, shielding Katie as his mind raced. Two men, armed, organized. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was coordinated. A network. Josh whispered from behind a fallen log. "What the hell is going on? Who are these people?" Dennis couldn't answer. All he could do was watch as the new figure slowly approached Ray, leaned in and muttered something. Ray nodded. Then both looked straight up at the ridge. "I suggest you hand the girl over," the newcomer called out. His voice was deeper, steadier than Ray's. No emotion, no threats, just instructions like someone used to being obeyed. "No one else has to get hurt." Dennis rose halfway from his crouch, flashlight in one hand, sidearm in the other. "She's not going anywhere with you. You've already crossed every line. Let us leave, and maybe you live to see a trial." The man didn't flinch. He didn't even seem surprised. "Captain Dennis Hale," he said, calm as ever. "We know exactly who you are, and that little girl is a loose end. One we don't intend to leave behind." Katie began to tremble. Axel growled low again, but this time it wasn't just warning. It was fear. Dennis looked down at her, and she looked up with tears streaming down her cheeks. "He told me," she said through sobs. "He told me they would come for me if I ever escaped. That they always come." Josh gritted his teeth. "Then we don't run. We stand. Right here." Dennis shook his head. "Not with her in the crossfire. We move fast, low. No heroics." In one sudden motion, Dennis tossed a flashlight down the slope. It hit a tree and rolled, creating a false beacon. At the same moment, He grabbed Katie and darted toward the deeper woods behind them. Josh followed tight, and Axel stayed glued to Katie's side. A gunshot cracked the silence, hitting the tree inches from where Dennis had just been. Bark exploded into splinters. They kept running, heartbeats pounding louder than footsteps. Behind them, Ray laughed. Not loud, not crazed, quiet, like he already knew how this would end. They ran deeper into the forest, branches whipping across their faces, mud clinging to their boots. Dennis led the way with Katie pressed close to his side, her breath shallow and panicked. Josh followed behind, covering the rear, glancing back every few seconds with one hand on his sidearm. Axel never left Katie's side, his growls low, constant, an anchor in chaos. Gunshots echoed in the distance, but they weren't aimed anymore. They were warnings, signals. The hunters didn't need to shoot. They were pushing them, herding them like prey. Dennis could feel it. These men weren't chasing out of desperation. They were controlling the terrain. And worse, they knew it better than he did. Every trail he turned down seemed to curve back toward danger. It was like they were being funneled. But to where? A clearing? A trap? His radio still hissed static. The signal was gone. He stopped behind a thick fallen tree and knelt, pulling Katie close. "Look at me," he said firmly. "Katie, we need to know. Is there anywhere nearby they would take you? Somewhere you saw or heard them talk about?" Katie hesitated. Her lips parted, and her eyes darted toward the east. "There was a place," she whispered. "He called it the Red Barn. I never saw it, but he said, if I ever ran, that's where the punishment happened." Josh's eyes widened. "Dennis, that's real. I've heard rumors. Locals talk about it. Some old abandoned barn on Whitmore Road, burned in the 90s, never rebuilt. No one goes there anymore." Dennis's heart dropped. "If that's where they're driving us, we have to change course." But before they could move, Katie clutched Dennis's arm with sudden force. "There's more," she said, her voice cracking. "The mark on my wrist." It wasn't the first time. She pulled back the collar of her shirt. There, along her collarbone, was a faint, faded scar in the shape of the same symbol. "I had one when I was 5. My mom had it too." Dennis's breath caught. "Katie, your mom. What happened to her?" Katie didn't speak right away. When she finally did, the words shattered the air between them. "She disappeared. They said it was a car crash. But now I think she was part of them." Silence fell like a hammer. Josh stared at Dennis. Dennis stared at Katie. The truth was more twisted than either of them had imagined. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was generational. A system. A legacy of horror passed down and hidden in plain sight. The symbol wasn't just a mark. It was a bloodline. Suddenly, Axel growled, louder this time. Not at the trees behind them, but at something moving directly ahead. Through the thinning trees, the silhouette of the old barn emerged like a ghost from Katie's worst memories. Its frame was blackened with age and fire, partially collapsed on one side, the roof sagging in defeat. Red paint, chipped and faded, still clung to the cracked wood, enough to give the place its name. Dennis stopped at the edge of the clearing, staring at it with dread. "They're hurting us here on purpose," he muttered. Josh nodded grimly. "This is the endgame." Axel barked once, sharp and urgent. Then he bolted toward the side of the barn, tail low, body tense. Katie grabbed Dennis's hand. "We can't go in there. Please, that place is wrong." Dennis crouched beside her, eyes locked on hers. "I believe you, but we can't outrun this anymore. Whatever they started here, we finish it today." His voice was calm, but inside, every nerve screamed. He rose and motioned Josh forward. Together, they approached the rotting doors. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with smoke, mold, and something older, decay maybe. Symbols like the one on Katie's skin were scrawled on the walls in black soot and ash. Chains hung from beams above, and old mattresses were scattered across the floor. Dennis felt bile rise in his throat. "How many girls came through here?" Josh whispered, but no one answered. Katie stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with memory and horror. Then, A voice echoed from the darkness above. "I knew you'd bring her back, Captain." Ray stepped out from the shadows in the loft above, rifle in hand, aiming down. Behind him, the other man, the one in black, stood motionless. "You think you're saving her?" Ray said, voice sharp now, stripped of its calm. "You're delivering her, like it was always meant to be." Katie took a step back, her breath shaking. "Why me?" she cried. "What do you want from me?" Ray smiled, cruel and wide. "Because you're the key, sweetheart, just like your mother was." Dennis raised his weapon. "Let her go. Let all of this die here." Ray didn't budge. "It's already bigger than you, Captain. You don't stop bloodlines. You continue them." As the tension cracked like a wire stretched too far, a sudden noise broke through the wall behind them. A thud, then a groan. Axel growled low and lunged toward the back of the barn. From the far corner, a trapdoor creaked open. A figure began to climb out. A woman. Dennis didn't move at first. "No segundo todo Peru." The woman rising from the trapdoor looked ghost-like. Gaunt, bruised, eyes sunken with time and torment. But Katie stepped forward, hand trembling, lips parted. "Mom!" Her voice cracked mid-breath. The woman's head turned sharply. A gasp escaped her lips, and for a moment, even Ray faltered. "Katie?" she whispered back, her voice raw, like it hadn't been used in years. "Oh my God, Katie!" Ray shouted from the loft. "No, she's not yours anymore." He raised the rifle, but before he could fire, Axel sprang forward with a vicious bark, slamming into the wooden beams below. The loft groaned and gave way. Ray crashed down in a tangle of broken boards and dust, the rifle spinning from his hands. Josh darted forward, disarming him before he could recover. The man in black bolted toward the exit, but Dennis stepped into his path and leveled his weapon. "End of the line," he growled. The man froze, hands raised. Katie ran to her mother, who collapsed into her arms. They held each other like time itself had finally stopped punishing them. "I thought you were dead," Katie sobbed. Her mother nodded, tears falling. "They tried, but I waited. I waited for you." The moment was painful, raw, beautiful. Dennis stood silent, letting them have it. He knew they deserved more than he could ever give. Ray lay on the ground, coughing, defeated but still defiant. "You don't get it," he spat. "This won't stop with me. There are others. Cities. Families. You can't burn out something that's already in the blood." Dennis stared at him, then knelt beside him. "You're right," he said, "but we can burn this place to the ground." He stood, poured fuel from his emergency pack across the barn floor, and lit a flare. Flames began to crawl like justice through the rotted wood. They moved fast. Dennis, Josh, Katie, her mother, and Axel ran through the trees as the red barn behind them was swallowed by fire. Sirens finally echoed in the distance, reinforcements, medics, law enforcement. They had signal again. The world had come back. But for Dennis, the moment he turned and saw the barn collapse in flames, he knew something had ended, and something else had begun. Katie sat beside her mother in the ambulance, holding her hand tightly. "It's over," she whispered. Her mother squeezed back. "No, sweetheart. It's just beginning." Dennis stood nearby, watching the forest burn behind him, Axel at his side. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd truly saved someone.